Hello, good evening. Welcome to another interview in the series that we're doing to kind of publicize and make people aware of Steampunk Over Ether, which is the virtual steampunk festival we're holding over the 25th and 26th of April. We're going to have lots of content. We've got lots of people lined up, some very exciting things, I can tell you. And we're still looking for contributions. So if anybody wants to contribute, whether they be a performer, a writer, an artist, or somebody from the community, we're looking for things like workshops. We're looking for videos. We're looking for anything really, any kind of performance or whatever. If you can just email those to news@steampaper.co.uk, or if you get in touch through messaging on the Steampaper Facebook page where we're broadcasting this at the moment. Then that's great. Just get in touch and we'll have a chat about what you can do. So we're looking for all sorts of stuff. It's going to be a really good weekend, really exciting. I'm really looking forward to it. So we've talked to a few people, but I'm very excited tonight to talk to somebody who I haven't really had a good chat with, and I've always been meaning to. Kind of stop him and have a long chat, but at events and things, you never really get the chance. Sometimes there's so much going on, so many things happening, you never really get a chance to talk to people. So it's a great opportunity now for me to chat to Gregg McNeill of DarkBox. So, hello, Greg.
Hey, how you doing?
We can see you there all the way from Falkirk, I believe. Is that right?
Yep, I'm here in my studio in Falkirk. It's been a little bit quiet here since all this craziness happened.
Yeah. There's a slight delay, so just warning you of that. So there might be a little bit of jumping in and jumping out. Well, the first thing I wanted to ask you was, obviously you're known for your photography, your amazing photography. So when did you first get into photography? What sort of age and what's got you started?
I've been a photographer for more than 30 years, and I've been shooting still photography and feature films and documentaries and videos and things for most of my life. And I started getting into tintype photography and this Victorian era photography about 5 years ago.
Okay, so what was the initial thing though? What did you start doing when you first picked up a camera? Was there a particular thing that got you excited about it, or something you wanted to photograph? Were you given a camera?
Oh wow, that's a really good question. The first thing that really it's always been about portraits for me. I think faces and people and the context of people and their environments has always fascinated me.
Yeah, I mean, I remember. I think the first camera I got given was, I think my granddad gave me a box Brownie, which was a hell of a thing. And I remember taking pictures of Lyme Regis. But I don't think I really got the bug till a bit later. And I did lots of photography. I did quite a lot of photography at college, and then it's all kind of gone by now. But you've obviously you persevered with it, and you've got you've produced some amazing stuff. But you're also you're known for steampunk events. We often see you at steampunk events. So what got you into steampunk? How did you get into steampunk?
Well, I was always in love with the aesthetic, and it wasn't until about 10 years ago that I realized that aesthetic had a name. And when I started doing the tintype work, I was looking for something to do with the tintype work that would be interesting, and realized this great crossover potential with my work and steampunk. And so we started looking into different steampunk events, and that's how we got involved with it.
Yes.
In fact, our first event was actually the Asylum. It was Asylum 9.
Right. Okay. And you obviously have gone back to historical process for your photography. Why is that? I mean, is there something about it you like, or is there something lacking in modern photography? What is it you like about the historical processes?
What really fascinates me about the historical processes is the idea of making an image by hand. We've been we become so disconnected from the process of making photographs and taking photographs that going back to these basics and actually making emulsions and making images from the very start is something that really, really fulfills me.
Okay, so it's, but it can't be just about making life harder for yourself. I mean, what are the differences, would you say, between just taking a picture with a modern camera and doing what you do?
Well, it's all about slowing down. It's all about realizing that every moment and every photograph has to have meaning. And the process that I'm doing takes around 15 minutes from start to finish. And when you have one frame every 15 minutes, you really take the time to look at it. When I'm under the cloth and looking through the lens at that image, I'm really concentrating on several different things. The relationship of the person in the environment and where the person is in the frame and all these different minutiae that you find and look for in these images. It really forces you to slow down and really think about what you're doing.
Okay, so now I'm assuming that you use a traditional old-fashioned style camera, which means that you've got your. Am I right in saying if you have your head buried underneath a cloth and you're looking at a big screen? I mean, that's a completely different experience to just looking through a viewfinder.
Yeah, it is. It's also upside down and flipped left to right. So when you're when you're seeing this, your world, you're seeing it in a way that you're not used to seeing it. And I've gotten to the point where I recognize faces, but I really remember them upside down and backwards.
Yeah, it's interesting. I used to teach design, and one of the things I used to say is if you're doing, especially if you're doing sort of a magazine layout or something like that, or a poster layout, is often look at it upside down. Because if you look at it upside down, you'll notice when it's not in balance, when there's things that aren't kind of in harmony, because you're less concentrating on the words and everything else. You're looking at the signs. And so we'd have a few comments about your background. Ian Crichton has said, "Nice police box. Where did you get the lamp?" I don't know whether that's. And
I got that from him.
Yeah, I thought that was coming. Yeah, I honestly thought that was coming. And Malika is saying, "Is that a TARDIS I see behind you?" I mean, that would be appropriate, wouldn't it? Really, for what you do, a TARDIS. So
there was a
go on.
There was an event I was at. It was at Steampunks in Space a couple of years ago, and I was having a conversation with John Naylor about how at some point it would be really cool to have a TARDIS darkroom. And he looked at me in that way that John looks at you, and he said,
"Yeah,
have it ready by Timequake," and then walked away. And then all of a sudden, this idea that I had all of a sudden had a deadline, and so it ended up getting built. It's one of my favorite things I've ever done, and it's really the first large scale thing I've ever built.
It's certainly that's one of the things he does. He does do that. He does bring out that in people. That he plants an idea and then says, "Right, next Tuesday, please." Definitely. So we talked
Yes.
A little bit about the. I mentioned the camera. So tell me a bit more about the camera that you use.
The camera that I use is a 10 by 12 inch Vajaswari large format camera. It's probably from around the 1940s, and it's a camera that was used a lot in the graphics industry. But the period part of the whole process is this. This is my Scoville Morrison 300 millimeter Petzval lens. This lens is from 1870.
Wow!
It's one of the favorite things I've ever owned. The glass is really, really lovely. It's the rack and pinion focus still works. And the thing about lenses from this era, in order to control the depth of field, you use, these are called Waterhouse stops.
Right.
And so instead of moving an iris to open and close it, you just place these in the camera itself, and there's your f-stop change. It's really fantastic. And
See,
when I got this lens,
I was just thinking that's really old school, and I was thinking, yeah, yeah, of course it is.
yeah, this this lens didn't come with this brass piece here. It's called a flange. It's what how the lens attaches to the camera itself, the board. So I had to find a grumpy old machinist to make this for me. And so I took the lens into this guy and said, I need a piece that this will fit into. And he grumbly said, yeah, fine, whatever. And then about a week later, because I went to another machinist, it was a young guy, and he said, no, I'm not going to do that. But you should talk to Bob. And sent me down the street to Bob. And Bob had this amazing workspace. It was just piled high with things, and you could tell that it hadn't been dusted or cleaned since 1950. And he had one of these light blue lab coats on, and he came out, and it's like, like I was intruding in his space. It was fantastic. But I got the flange made, and the lens is fantastic. I really love it.
Cool. And the body of the camera, is it a wooden one with bellows? I have this picture in my head of the old traditional camera you see in silent movies and stuff. Is that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually it's a larger version of.
Yeah,
it's a larger version of this one.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing. That's the kind of thing I'm picturing. I'm sure I've seen it, but I'm just in my head right now. That's what I'm picturing. So tell us a little bit about. So we talked about the camera, and you've talked about how you changed the f-stops on it, which is quite amazing, and the fact that you see everything upside down. So tell us a bit more about the process involved. What happens after you pointed the camera, and presumably you put a plate in. What happens after that?
Well, after we get everything focused, we go into the darkroom and we pour the plate, which means I have a plate and then I coat it with a substance called collodion, which is a nitrocellulose gun cotton dissolved in ether and a couple of other things. And once that plate is coated, then we soak it in silver nitrate. And when it's in the silver nitrate, it's the collodion layer is becoming light sensitive. And once that process has happened, we load it into the plate holder, and then we take our photograph. Now, the thing about this process is that it needs a lot of light. It's a very slow process. So my exposure times are anywhere between 6 and 9 or 12 seconds.
Right.
So you have to sit still for that long. And I have a Victorian era head brace that fits in the back of your neck to keep your head still. And one of the reasons why Victorians don't usually smile in photographs is because they have to stand perfectly still for so long with little bits of metal jammed in the back of their heads.
So how on earth do they deal with kids? I mean, you do see a few children, but they tend to be older children. You certainly don't see that many pictures of babies. Is that why, do you think?
Well, babies, they had special braces where they would sit the baby and they'd have this brace and it would go under the arms and to the back of the head, or they would wait until the very young children were sleeping and get them in the arms. But a lot of times if you see a child in one of these photographs and they are in perfect focus, they might be dead. Memento mori photography was a big thing for the Victorians.
Yeah, but they didn't necessarily kill the child just so they could take a photograph of it.
No. This would have been after that process.
Yeah. So you've got the plate in. You're exposing the plate for up to 12 seconds. You were saying. So then, then you have to take the plate out and do something with it.
Right. Then we go back into the darkroom and we take out the plate and I pour the developer on the plate by hand and we develop it for 15 seconds, rinse it off with water, and then it's a negative. And then you take this out of the darkroom and put it in a fixer tank and we slide it in and you can watch the photograph go from negative to positive. It's what I call the magic bit. And it's the part where everybody stands amazed. It is so fascinating to watch. It's something I never get tired of.
So you're taking the plate. Obviously, is once you've exposed it, you cover it up again, and then you do the next process in a darkroom, and then
Yes.
revealing the image. Does that happen in the darkroom? I just missed that bit, or does it?
No. Once you rinse the developer off the plate, it's light safe.
Yeah.
So you can take it out of the darkroom at that point and put it in the fixer.
Yeah. Cool. I did do this. I did do all this at college, but that was a very long time ago for me. I can tell you, a very long time ago. We got a comment from Colin Matteson. I believe you've taken his picture. He said, "I'm sure Greg had me in the brace for longer than 9 or 12 seconds." I think that was just you, Colin. Just you.
It seems. I often say it's the longest 7 or 8 seconds of your life.
Yeah. We got a question from Lika, actually, a good question. So I'm going to ask you this one. How did you learn about all this? How did you learn your craft?
Well, I was going through this phase in my professional life where I was getting really disenchanted with the work that I was doing, and my wise and lovely wife told me to find something else to do, or else. So I was looking through a series of photographs done by this artist that I really enjoy. And I noticed that all the ones that I had liked had this look. And I did some research about it and found this wet collodion process. And through my research, I found a bunch of people that taught it. And then I found out who taught all of them, and then went to that guy. And that guy is a gentleman named John Brewer in Manchester. Mm-hmm. And he taught me this process over the course of a weekend, and it was a rabbit hole that I just never got out of.
I like that. It's always good to learn from somebody who's mastered the trade. You can only really, I mean, you can get stuff out of books and you can get stuff out of kind of YouTube tutorials, on some things, but learning from somebody who's kind of done it for years, there's no substitute, absolutely no substitute. And I think it's often a lot more fun as well. Not more reactive.
Absolutely. And when people talk to me and ask me about this process, I often say, if you're interested, you really need to take a class, because like you said, you can watch all the YouTube videos out there, but until you've actually had someone show you how to physically pour a plate, you can't get that from a video.
Yeah. So, Now you've so we'll talk about how you've done how you do all these different processes, but you actually do this at events. It's not like you have a studio set up somewhere with all the stuff laid out and everything there for you. You do this at events, so you've got to take all that gear, and also I know you do this. You can do this for anyone. You can turn up anywhere and do this. Well, not at the moment, but usually you turn up with all this stuff. So you must have a portable darkroom, and I mean, obviously we've mentioned the TARDIS there. So how does that work? How long does that take to set up, and is it a right pain?
It is. It really is, and it takes around 2.5 hours to set up, mm-hmm. And it is with my other portable darkroom, the smaller one. It is exactly a Vauxhall Zafira load, front to back, top to bottom. Yeah. If I'm taking this guy, then it's, Amazon white van kind of a thing. And it's about 2.5 hours to set up. It's not inconsequential.
Are there any particular problems in doing what you do? Like, I mean, obviously you're handling chemicals and things like that. So are there safety issues involved you've got to be aware of?
Well, doing events versus working in the studio, it's a completely different animal.
Yeah.
And every event I'm at, I learn something new about what I'm doing. One of the things you have to understand is with the chemistry ages differently. So the developer and the collodion, they age differently. One gains contrast as it ages, and one loses contrast as it ages. So you want to have this chemistry mixed around the same time to kind of keep that balance of image quality. You don't want your silver bath to get too warm, because once it starts getting warm, weird chemical things happen and plates start to look really streaky. And so you have to keep in mind that if it's really warm out, I want to change the silver bath at least once a day, which means I've got to have a cooler. So I bought this ridiculous cooler that keeps ice for 3 days. It's this obnoxious cooler. And it's having, a backup silver bath and backup collodion and backup developer and all of these things. And then when you get to an event, before I get to an event, I have to make sure that I have reasonable access to water. Is there electricity for the lights? It's all these different things that I have to keep in mind about how I'm going to do my job. So it's not just walking in, rocking in, setting up on a table.
Yeah, no, I mean, I thoroughly get that. Part of the appeal, I suppose, in some ways, is there are all these variables, so it's not a perfect science. So, I mean, there's no, and is it the imperfection of it that appeals to you?
Absolutely, absolutely. The imperfections are something that I really embrace. You have these aesthetics in photography. You have the Ansel Adams school, which is everything front to back in perfect focus, everything perfectly exposed. And I tend to think of that hyper realism. It's great and it's beautiful, but it's not my aesthetic.
Yeah.
I've been working with handmade cameras and plastic cameras and all this stuff all of my life. One of my friends used to say that my photographic goal in life was to put as many barriers between myself and an image as possible. So I would do things like not just Polaroid in a plastic camera, but pinhole Polaroid in a plastic camera, and taking a lens off this camera and putting it on this camera, and taking the body of this camera and putting it on the back of this camera. Anything that I could do to degrade an image in camera, I would do. And what I didn't realize until I learned this process, this wet plate collodion process, is that I've been working to this aesthetic my entire life.
Yeah. So you're, as well as all this difficulty, I've got a comment here from Andy Armand. So when you're setting up these shots, he says, and then you get awkward people like me who actually want the TARDIS as a background. So you got to try and rearrange things just to suit people like Andy. Is that right?
Well, that was when Andy had his costume, his Masonic Doctor Who costume. Of course, we had to do it in front of the TARDIS. So we made sure that was the first shot of the day, so that I could just roll out and put up lights in the area where the public would be and try to get it done before the safety elves could find me.
Yeah, you're just far too nice. You see, that's. Here's an intelligent question now, obviously from Nimrod. He says, "Can you take pictures of groups of people, and if so, how many can you fit in one shot?"
Well, that's a very good question. Because of the way that light works, when you move lights away from a subject, you lose twice as much light as you do distance. So as I move lights back, I need more light striking groups of people. So depending on how long they can stand still, I can do large groups of people. I've done 4 or 5, maybe 6 at a time. It's just that because I have to move the lights farther back, I lose exposure, which means I have to have them stand still for longer.
So is this
This year I was supposed to be one of my goals was to upgrade my lighting setup, and I wanted to have this one large, big source, a big, like basically a big china ball that would hang over the people, and it was going to be this monstrous big light. And I found a place that I can buy it. I just need to make it happen. But once I get that large light, then I can not only have shorter exposure times, but I can do larger groups of people.
is this not something you can do outside in daylight? Because obviously there's a big light up there. You know, can you use that in this photography?
Absolutely. Absolutely, that's definitely something we can do. Because of the nature of the way this process works, I judge exposure time by experience. Meaning, when I get into a place, I take a test plate and then have to figure out what the exposure time is. And if I go from inside to outside, I'm going to have to figure out what that exposure time is as well. Now, outside, obviously, much shorter exposure time, so I can use my Waterhouse stops to stop down so I can get to a good 4-second exposure. The reason that 4 seconds is such a great exposure time is because it's easy to estimate 4 seconds, and I have a metronome that does that. Now, if you get less than 4 seconds, the time that you take to pull this off and put this back on, say 2 seconds. Well, if I'm a quarter second off, that's a really legitimately it's a legitimately large amount of time exposure wise. But once you get to about 4 seconds, that time is much easier to deal with, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So it's a much greater proportion the shorter the exposure. Yeah.
Yes.
So
yes.
I'm just going to show a couple of images of yours, and just tell us a little about them. So I'm going to pop you up on screen, and I'm going to pop up a couple of images next to you. So the first one is Dr. Jeff, which I think is a wonderful picture. It's just wonderful. It's a directly side on picture of him, which is very Dr. Jeff in the first place. But so tell me a little bit about the picture.
Well, the first time I met Dr. Jeff was at Timequake, and I took his photograph, but I took it like face on. And then when I got home, I was looking at his stuff and realizing that all of his branding had this profile shot.
Yeah.
And I emailed him and I was, Dr. Jeff, why didn't we do this? He's like, oh, I didn't think of that. So the next time we were at the same event, I said, we are taking this now. And we took the profile shot, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
And his hair was perfectly on brand.
Now this has like a lot of these shots that you do, it has this really interesting framing to it. So how does that framing happen? You know, around the edges you get these colorations and
around the edges, those are called oysters.
All right.
And that's where the silver nitrate has seeped under the frame that's holding the plate in place. And there are ways to make that more apparent, and there are ways to make that less apparent. And I kind of achieve a nice balance between having too much oysters, which looks like a mistake, and having just a pleasing amount of of crap.
It's a great kind of effect. It's not really an effect, but it's like an effect. Now I've just put up a picture of somebody that everybody hopefully will recognise, and with his moustache, and that's Mr. B. Again, I think I was around when you took this, and I think it's a fairly swift affair. I remember he was there, you were there, and there was time, and but it's a fantastic portrait. It looks like he's been sat intensely for hours. It's just one of those fantastic portraits, and it's perfectly framed, and it has that lovely effects around the edge. So tell us a little bit about that one.
Well, that one, it was at Steampunks in Space, and I had only recently started to listen to Mr. B. And when right after his sound check, I had this little fanboy moment where I walked up and I was like, "Oh, sir, I really love your work. You're really entertaining." And I gave him a card and I said, if it's at all possible, I would love to take about 15 minutes of your time and make a portrait of you.
Mm.
And he said in a very Mr. B way, "Well, I think that would be a fantastic use of my time." And came off the stage and we just shot the portrait. It was fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, as I say, I remember, I kind of remember it happening quite quickly, and yet, like I said, it just looks like, you know, you spent all day in the studio to get that one shot, because it's beautifully lit as well. I mean, the whole thing is fabulous.
Thank you.
And then I'm just going to show a couple of other ones quickly. So we have, I believe, Debbie, is that right?
Yeah.
And that's a fantastic costume. I mean, that's one of the great things about steampunks is they come pre-packaged. So what's
Indeed.
it? I mean, is it obviously it must be a great deal of fun to shoot people in costume rather than just kind of everyday stuff. Is that an appeal
It is.
for you?
It's absolutely, absolutely. Usually when we're at events, if I have the time, I want to walk around and find people and grab people out of the crowd and say, "Please," because a lot of times I will grab people and say, "Look, I don't want you to pay for this portrait. I just want it to add it to the Rogues Gallery." And so our Rogues Gallery has grown over the last several years. And Debbie was one of these people that really stood out to me. And she was in this beautiful yellow silk kimono number. And what's really fascinating about this particular portrait is that the way this process sees color is a bit skewed. It's an orthochromatic it's a panchromatic process.
Mm-hmm.
Orthochromatic process. And it's and it only sees blue, the blue end of the spectrum. A little bit of green, but mostly blue and ultraviolet. So everything beyond that, the reds, the oranges, the yellows, and most of the greens go very dark, almost black. But because the silk in her outfit was so reflective, it came out a light gray, and it fascinated me because I didn't think that that would happen. I thought it would be very dark because of the color. And it's one of the reasons why we have this perception of the Victorians as this very dour people, always dressing in darks and blacks and grays, when in fact the exact opposite was true. Right. They dressed in bright garish colors. Yeah. But this photographic process is the reason we think that.
Oh, right. That's a very good point. I never really thought of that. Because we know they're dressed in bright colors. But like you say, the impression is they're down. Now, I've got another picture here, one more picture in this kind of sequence, which is of a man in a military costume and a full face mask, which I believe we were chatting earlier, and which I believe you've called "Are You My Mummy?" Which I'm sure people who recognise the TARDIS will get that reference, I'm sure. So tell us a little bit about. I mean, here you're not shooting somebody's face at all, are you? I mean, what?
Well, this young man, he was about 12 years old, I think, 10 or 12 years old.
Because there's no way of telling his age in what he's wearing.
Absolutely. And we found him, and I picked him out, and I was like, "Oh, please let me take your photograph." And he stood there. He was perfect. You know, sometimes kids, they can't stand still for that long, but he was perfect. He just sat there, and we got this portrait. It's amazing. It's one of my favorites.
Cool. Yeah. No, I like that one. It's really nice. So now I take it that that was all produced using, is it the Tintype process? Is that what you call it?
Yeah.
Yeah. But
the process is called wet plate collodion, and you have two types of photographs you can take. You can take tintypes, mm-hmm. which are on metal, and ambrotypes, which are on glass.
Right.
And when they're on glass, it's a clear glass, and you have to put it in front of something dark in order to see the image.
Right. But I gather you're now experimenting with something called salt prints. Is that right?
Yeah, this is a process. It's a printing process. It's one of the first printing processes to ever use a negative. It was invented around 1833 by a guy named Fox Talbot. And
I've heard of
basically
him.
what you do, what you do is you soak a piece of paper in salt water, and then you let that dry, and then you brush on silver nitrate, let that dry, and then you put your negative in contact with the paper, expose it to UV light, and then develop it in salt water. And you get these amazingly beautiful, deep brown, gorgeous images. And it just takes the wet collodion aesthetic a step further. And when I was just learning this process, I was trying to think something quirky and interesting that would really intrigue people. And so I started with a series of biscuits. And so I took these glass amber type pictures of biscuits.
I'm putting them up now so people can see them.
Up, so they filled the frame, and then made digital negatives from those so that I could do this salt print process. Now, the reason I had to do digital negatives is because this process needs a very, very dense negative. And at this point, I'm still learning how to do glass negatives, which is a different process than the one I'm doing now. So I made the digital negatives to just get started. And the first one I did was malted milk, because, of course. And then I just went through all of the different biscuits. And so currently, I think I'm at 6. So I'm still looking for more biscuits. I think the next is going to be the rich tea.
Okay. I've been popping these up on screen as we've been talking and finishing with the malted milk, which obviously is the one that's used in tea dueling. So it's a clear winner as far as steampunks goes. Now we had a hello from a guy called Simon Leach, and he said, "Have you thought about doing cyanotypes?" Now I have no idea what they are. They said the blues in that are gorgeous.
Cyanotypes is actually something I've been experimenting with recently. I don't have any to hand. But yeah, cyanotypes are fantastic. That was a process invented by a guy named Herschel, who many people know as an astronomer, but he is the unknown hidden rock star of photography. He discovered how to fix photographs, because this whole photographic problem had been going on for many, many decades. And the problem was no one could figure out how to make these photographs permanent. But Sir John Herschel, he figured out that sodium thiosulfate dissolved these silver salts and made these photographs permanent. And he's this really weird guy, because he has all of these fingers and all of these different pies all over the place. And there was one point where he was experimenting with how to fix photographs and trying to use all these different salts to try and figure out how to do it. And there's this one scientific paper that has this amazing footnote where he's talking about all these different things that he was experimenting with, and one of them was urine. And the footnote is, the urine was from a boa constrictor. The urine was 15 years old. So unpack that for a second. The guy had 15-year-old boa constrictor urine in his lab on a shelf and was thinking of a problem, solving a problem, going, oh, hey, I've got that boa constrictor urine. I must be 15 years old by now. And
so maturing in the bottle, I guess, something like that.
Yes, absolutely.
I got a question from Ali Allgood. Is there anyone you'd really love to take a picture of? So is there anyone who you haven't managed to capture in the lens that you'd like to?
I'd have to think about that. There are so many people that I've wanted to get for a long time. I definitely want to have a complete collection of steampunk performers. Like Steam Powered Giraffe would be a fantastic portrait.
Yeah, I agree. I think they especially, with the amazing look they have, it would make a fantastic, an interesting thing to see them in black and white as well, because they are so colourful as a band. If you look
Yeah.
at any of the stuff they put out, it's just a riot of color. It would be lovely to see that whole thing in the monochrome. Now, Michelle is asking, what's your favorite tintype or ambrotype that you've taken? So, what's the favorite picture, do you think?
Ooh. It would have to be. It would have to be one that I took of my daughter. I'm going to have to take you over to see it. There it is.
Oh, right. Yes. Now,
Obviously, it's blown up. It's my daughter. I've taken a lot of photos of her, obviously, and there are two of them that I really love. That's one of them, and there's another one that I took, I think, within 6 months of me learning the process, and it's her in a little Newsies hat, and I told her she had to be very quiet and very still, and so just before I took the photo, she put her finger on her lips, and it's so fantastic.
Oh, that's awesome. That's actually a really good answer, because nobody can fault you for that. Nobody. It doesn't matter how jealous they are about you taking their picture, they can't fault you for saying that. So no, that's a good answer. I like that answer. And I think that picture on your website. I think, have I seen it on your website in your portfolio? Yeah. So if people want to have a look at that, it's actually on the website. Now I talked to Tom Nimue the other day. And I know you're involved in a new project with Hopeless Maine, where they're going to be making a movie, which again is moving pictures. So that's something different for you. So how are you approaching that? And I gather the whole key is some kind of special camera. Is that right? Tell us more.
Yeah. As in a previous life, I was cinematographer, and I started out in film and then moved into video and things like that. Well, when Tom first talked about the idea of doing The Blind Fisherman as a film, when I was looking at it and I was reading it, I thought, oh, this would be fantastic, in the flavor of the really old silent films like the Méliès brothers and all of that flavor. And he said, oh, yeah, absolutely. That'd be the way to go. And I said, well, and if you really want to go for that aesthetic, you got to go all the way, go big or go home. And so that means that we need to shoot it on a hand cranked motion picture camera, because you have so often when people try to do the silent film aesthetic, they shoot it on video and then they add a little flickery thing in post with some lines down it.
Yeah.
And it just looks like an Instagram filter. Well, there's nothing like when you see hand cranked motion pictures, there's an aesthetic and a feel that you get that you aren't even aware that you're seeing, that makes it real. And so I at first was looking for a period correct camera from the early 1900s. And it turns out that those are ridiculously difficult to find. And even if you find them, they're rarely in working order. So the next best thing I found was a little spring wound camera called a Bolex. It's basically the tank of cameras. And there are certain models that you can disengage the drive and do hand cranked with. So what we've decided is to shoot it on this hand cranked Bolex that's from around 1940, 1950 with lenses from that time and do it all hand cranked.
That sounds awesome. And I gather it's going to be using puppets. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a scene in the film where we have these scenes underwater with these creatures, and realizing these creatures, the only way we could think of doing it was with puppets, marionettes, kind of moving them through and kind of getting that whole aesthetic underwater. There were a few films that had underwater scenes in them from this time. But of course, we're not going to be able to do that. And the best way to do that, we thought, was with marionettes, and there's also a small child in the story, and this small little baby has to move around and do some things, and there's no way we could do that with a real human, like toss her into the lake.
Well, I think that's great, because if you look at some of Moliere's movies, there's a whole load of kind of interesting prop making, and it's very like animation. It's very like animation and very graphic, which is quite wonderful. Yeah. And it also reminds me when Tom first said to me, "Oh, and we're going to use puppets." It's like where my head was all those lovely puppet theaters, shadow puppet theaters. Where you get the puppets behind the screen. Yeah. And they're dancing around, and I just thought that would be perfect and brilliant. And and that combined with the idea of the that whole hand crank camera kind of thing, I just thought it was brilliant. So I'm really excited by it. I have to say, I'm very excited by the whole thing, and I can't wait for it to come to fruition. So tell us a little bit.
It's another instance of me putting as many barriers between myself and an image as possible.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about what you're working on at the moment. Now I know we've got down at the bottom of the screen. You can see it down here. Your Patreon URL, and so people can support you on Patreon. So I gather you're doing some work towards that at the moment.
Yeah, a lot of, because of all the events that have canceled, I've put focus into making content for my Patreon, and my Patreon is basically, my goal with it is I want to shoot my way through the history of photography, from the very first photograph all the way through the possibility of making my own film emulsion. And to that end, I've done lots and lots of research about different photographic processes that came before film. And I'm slowly going through and learning them. And the idea is that my patrons will learn along with me, and we will explore these historical processes together. I've got several videos that I'm working on of different things. And each of these videos, first of all, they're not tutorials. I'm not trying to teach these processes. I'm learning these processes, and people are learning about these processes with me, but I'm not teaching them. So like the first video I put up was making a salt print from a digital negative from this camera called a Lubitel. And it's a medium format camera that I shot 35 millimeter film in. So the image, the print actually has sprocket holes, and the image goes all the way through the sprocket holes. And so while I'm talking about making the salt print, I'm also talking about this particular camera and where it came from and how the image was made. And so each image has a story, and the story of these images is what I want to tell through the process. The other video I'm working on now is about the next robot image.
Right.
The next robot salt print. And I'm following that from, I call it from concept to print. So we start off with the robot, and we make the glass plate, and then scan the glass plate, and then make the salt print from that. So we're following that story. And as we follow the story, I'm also telling a story about robots in fiction and how that started and how that's gone through, and the story of the little retro clockwork robots and where they came from.
That's awesome. I mean, one thing, we've had a comment a little bit earlier from Martin Saint saying, "Hi, Greg, love to see your enthusiasm." And I have to say that's one of the things that, I think definitely comes across is it's not so much that you're teaching people about this stuff, it's your enthusiasm is kind of telling these lovely stories. And at the end of it, you actually learn something. I mean, I've learned an awful lot in the past 45 minutes or so we've been chatting. And it's been wonderful. I love that. I love talking to people who are enthusiastic and knowledgeable and have a passion about something. And you've certainly got all those things. So I think we're going to wrap it up there, as we've been chatting a little while. I'm just going to put up on your screen, various ways people can get hold of you. So let's just move those down there. So at the bottom of the screen, we've got your patron, DarkBox Images. So do check out Gregg's patron and support him. There's some fantastic stuff he's producing. As I say, you can hopefully get infected by his enthusiasm. He's obviously on Instagram. What photographer wouldn't be on Instagram? On Twitter, and of course, you have your own website as well. So all those I've got up on the screen at the moment. But thanks very much, Gregg. Thank you for talking to us today. And I'm sure we'll.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's been good. It's been good. And I'm sure we'll chat again. It's nice to finally catch up and learn some stuff. So,
if there's one more thing that I could say, if anybody is interested in buying a Tintype portrait certificate, I'm selling certificates for portraits at events when the events start back up again. If you're looking for a gift for someone, if you know someone who's always wanted a portrait and has never gotten one, you can purchase those portrait certificates. Just give me a direct message on Facebook.
Cool. So like a voucher, effectively. Yeah. Okay. I think I'm going to have to get one for Count Rostov. Actually, I'm sure he needs one. I'm sure he needs it. Yeah, I can imagine that. That would work out really nicely. So thanks, Gregg, very much, and see you again. Thanks for talking to us today.
Okay.
So that was Gregg McNeill of DarkBox Images. Lovely chap. Always great to talk to him. He's so enthusiastic. So do check out his Patreon and his website and have a look at stuff. We've got some more interviews coming up. Well, I think we're going to talk to Dr. Jeff next week. I think we finally managed to track him down. Tomorrow night, I'm thinking of doing a little video about how you can make videos, how you can do stuff online, the kind of stuff that I'm using to make things so that anybody can make stuff. And so that you can, if you've never shot a video before or done a podcast or any of those things, it's basically, I'll be here, I'll be answering questions and helping. So if you want to shoot something for the Steampunk Over Ether event, for instance, which we've got coming up 25th, 26th of July, hopefully I'll give you some information and some technology and stuff and talk about all the things you could do to make a video. And I'm going to also talk a little bit about some of the technologies that you might use. So things like the software that I'm using to create all of this, things like Zoom, and also things... some of the technology you can use to record and so on. So that's tomorrow night is kind of like going to be a kind of technology one, just chatting to me. So if you've got any questions about any of that stuff, tomorrow night's the one. Just be me though. And then next week we'll be doing, like I say, talking to other people, and that's going to be fun. Just a couple of pointers. I'd like to point out that Violet Hugh, we spoke to the other day, she's doing a release of a new song tonight. Which I supplied a few lyrics to, so I'm a bit worried about how it's going to turn out, but I know Violet, it'll be fine. So do check that out on her YouTube channel. I think that's coming up at about 8:30. So check that out. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for your questions. Always good to have lots of questions, lots of people watching, and we'll catch up again soon. So don't forget Steampunk Over Ether, 25th, 26th of April. Bye-bye.